What's up, Yichi here. In this video, we're going to talk about whether it's better to rent or own your home. Let's jump right in. First, let's talk about cost. Take a look at this graph. Let's use a one-bedroom condo in downtown Toronto, which costs roughly $500,000 as an example. The monthly cost of owning a condo really depends on how much of a down payment you put when buying, which affects your biggest expense, the mortgage. As of July 2023, I'm assuming an interest rate of 5.75. So at 5% down, your monthly cost is roughly $3,864 after including condo fees, property taxes, and utilities. At a 20% down payment, your costs are roughly $3,400, and only if you're putting a staggering 45% down payment will your total cost be lower than renting at $2,614. As you can see, the biggest cost by far for owning a house is the mortgage, the amount you have to borrow from the bank. With renting, you pay a fixed amount of $2,500 plus utilities and insurance. And if you live in a rent-controlled building, that $2,500 can only go up by 2.5% a year. Now, obviously, costs are the biggest factor in determining whether it's better to buy or rent. And costs really depend on interest rates, and interest rates fluctuate throughout time. Right now, interest rates are through the roof. We've seen so many rate hikes by the Bank of Canada over the last few months, and it's really expensive to have a mortgage right now. But compare this to 3 years ago when interest rates were at historic lows during COVID, the cost of home ownership was a lot lower. So cost really depends on the time and the context and interest rates. Now let's talk about the benefits of home ownership. Number one is the capital appreciation. Take a look at this data by Treb. Historically, over a 20-year period, the average return on real estate in the GTA is around 6 to 7%. Now, obviously, this fluctuates year over year, and detached houses typically outperform townhouses and condos. Now, this amount has really gone up in the last few years. However, could we be in a bubble right now? Well, I'm not sure. Higher interest rates right now could force people to sell, therefore lowering home prices, but we still have a supply problem. That's why Rolexes and oil is expensive, because the producers of these products limit supply, which increase price. And at the end of the day, just like the stock or crypto market, it's all speculation. No one really knows where the price of homes are going. It's all just speculation. All we know for sure is historical data. Secondly, another benefit of home ownership is you can rent it out if you want. Now, you'll need a place to live yourself if you just have the one property, but you can create rental income for yourself, and that can offset some of the costs of home ownership. Now, remember, the downside to this is that rental income is taxable. It will be added to your total taxable income, and you will be taxed at your tax bracket. Another benefit of home ownership is you can actually get a home equity line of credit. If your house appreciates in value since the time you bought it, banks will actually extend you a home equity line of credit, which is essentially just cash that you have to repay at a certain interest based on the amount of appreciation that your house has had. And you can use this cash essentially to buy more properties and accumulate more assets. Lastly, one of the biggest benefits of home ownership is knowing you have a place to live and you can do pretty much whatever you want outside of condo bylaws. You don't have a landlord breathing down your neck. It is your house. Okay, now let's talk about the downsides of homeownership. Remember, if you live in your home, like Rich Dad Poor Dad says, your house is not an asset. Your house is actually a liability because you have to pay it every month in terms of mortgage payments, condo fees, property taxes. It doesn't actually generate you any cash flow if you're living in it. So your house is actually a liability. There are a lot of costs with home ownership, all of which can go up. The biggest one is the mortgage. Your interest rate can go up because the Bank of Canada can basically do whatever it wants. It can increase interest rates like it has in the last year or so, therefore increasing your monthly costs significantly, forcing you to sell. There are other costs such as condo fees, which may also go up year over year based on what is needed by the condo, whether there's enough in the reserve fund. Also, your property taxes that you have to pay quarterly, that might go up based on your assessed value of your house and how much tax revenue the municipality needs. There are also insurance costs which can go up, and not to mention any maintenance and repairs of the unit are solely on you. Another downside is that for the majority of Canadians, their net worth is more or less tied into their house. And that's not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes it may be better to diversify and own a bunch of different assets as opposed to having all your eggs in one basket. Okay, so those are some of the pros and cons of home ownership. Now let's talk about the pros and cons of renting. If you're living in a rent-controlled home, you'll have peace of mind knowing that the landlord can only increase your rent by a certain amount. In 2023 and 2024, that amount is 2.5%. How do you know you live in a rent-controlled home? Well, the official rule is if the first occupant of that building occupied that unit before November 15th of 2018, if that is the case, your house is rent controlled. If the first occupant occupied that house after November 15th of 2018, there is no rent control, meaning newer buildings, newer condos do not have rent control. Older buildings typically do. So why is that a benefit? Well, whether you're renting or owning a home, a certain amount of your cash outflows is going to be allocated towards your house expenses. And if you're renting in a rent controlled building, you know what your cash outflow is going to be. It's going to be more or less fixed year over year. And therefore, you can dedicate and allocate some of your disposable income into investments that yield a higher rate of return than the actual capital appreciation on the house. You can invest in things like equities or crypto or anything else, and you can use vehicles such as the TFSA to get tax-free capital gains. Another benefit of renting is you don't really have to worry about interest rates. Over the long term, yes, it affects everybody, but in the short term, if interest rates go up, yes, landlords and owners will have an increased mortgage payment if they're on a variable term or if their fixed term ends. But if you're in a rent-controlled house, that means your rent can only go up by so much. So even though the Bank of Canada has increased their interest rates, perhaps it doesn't affect you as much. Now, on the flip side of that, it actually could affect renters because, as we've seen in today's market, a lot of landlords are forced to sell because they can't keep up with their mortgage payments, in which case tenants are actually evicted and will have to find another place to live. So that can be very costly. So in a sense, interest rates ultimately do affect both renters and homeowners. Another huge benefit is flexibility. You want to live a nomadic lifestyle, you just want to try out a city for a year or two, great, rent there for a year, and at the end of your lease term, all you have to do is pack up and leave. That's it. Another huge benefit of renting, and this is what Patrick Bet-David always says, is you don't tie up a significant amount of capital into your house. You can use your funds to do other things such as start a business, go travel, do whatever you'd like, and that is a huge benefit of renting. So those are the benefits of renting. What are the downsides of renting? Well, the number one thing is you are essentially building equity for someone else. Your rent payments are essentially going to the homeowner or the landlord's mortgage payments. Now, it could be argued with high interest rates today that it's even hard for homeowners to build equities because a large portion of their mortgage payment is actually going towards interest and not principal. Another downside is it's ultimately not your house, and we need to get, as a renter, the landlord's permission to do a lot of things such as sublease or have renovations or anything else related to changing the house, and that can be a pretty bad feeling. Now, another downside of being a tenant is we can be evicted at the end of our term, in which case we have to find another place to live and always move. If the landlord is moving in or a family member is moving in or major renovations are being done to the unit or they're selling, well, they can evict us, give us a notice at the end of our term, and yes, we will have to find another place to live, which can be a huge hassle as a renter. And the last downside of renting is if you as a tenant are not living in a rent-controlled house, hypothetically, even though you've agreed on a certain fixed rate for rent at the end of your lease term, hypothetically, the landlord can jack up that rent to whatever he or she chooses, and it is outside of the tenant's control. At the end of the day, whether you buy or rent is ultimately up to you. There are pros and cons to both sides. And if you prefer to build equity in a slow and safe way, perhaps homeownership is right for you. If you prefer a nomadic lifestyle, or you prefer not tying up all your capital and taking risk, such as starting a business, well, then maybe renting is right for you. Ultimately, each person is unique and different, and the right choice is up to you. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.